everyone. This video is going to be about permaculture for renters. I want to talk about the common misconception that you have to own land in order to practice permaculture. Not only is permaculture not just about farming and gardening, but you can also do quite a bit of farming and gardening at a rented space. And then also some suggestions about convincing the landlord to get on board, or befriending the neighbors, or maybe some precautions to take before going all in on a rented space. So while I'm chatting with you, I will show you some pictures of a few different places that I've created while renting. I've always been a renter. I've never owned property. My parents didn't own property. So you'll see a wide variety of gardens that I myself have created. In this particular video, I won't show you anything that just pictures I've taken on tour or something. Just really want to focus on my own experience here and help to empower you to feel like living in paradise is still possible for you, even if you don't have a lot of money, even if you don't ever want to own land. If that's not the way you think about things, then I really honor and respect that. And I am really excited to share these beautiful spaces with you. So what I'm going to do is just have those slides kind of move through while I kind of run my mouth about what ideas come into my head when I think about permaculture for renters. So let's jump in, starting with the obvious, the garden. So you can definitely grow food in containers, on terraces, up the sides of buildings, or even in a very small plot of a rented land, especially if you rent a place where the landscape hasn't been kept up by previous tenants. If it's a lower income situation or a longer term rental, quite often the landlord is happy to let you have a garden or even plant a full-on food forest where you live. I have tended to be very candid with landlords. Being a lifelong renter, when I sign up to rent a place, I tell them in advance that I want to garden every single square inch of the site, and I make sure to only rent from landlords that are really into that and who are usually gardeners themselves. It's sort of like, pet policy. You can choose to rent places where the pet policy is sort of tenuous and you have to pay a big deposit and then just be always walking on eggshells, or you can choose to just rent from people who love dogs. So it's sort of the same with gardening, in my opinion. So I think just full disclosure ahead of time is a really good idea. And then another thing about befriending the landlord and befriending the neighbors and being a cool permaculture renter is keeping your site really aesthetically pleasing, keeping it clean, keeping it beautiful, pruning the trees, not letting it become something of an eyesore or a concern for the neighbors, even though often they will come up with reasons to be concerned that aren't necessarily of a concern to you through a permaculture lens. It's still important to try to bridge the gap wherever possible, especially if you don't own the property and could potentially be evicted if there's problems. In general, permaculture is about systems thinking, right? And so if you're thinking about renting a place and you don't know how long you're going to be there, and you don't know how deep you want to go, or you resist, planting trees when you're not going to be there to see them mature. If you sort of take a step back and you look at the full system and you think about how long trees are in succession, often you would buy a place and eventually end up not being there when the trees are mature. So, you have to kind of do it for more than just yourself. You have to do it for species other than your own, but also to consider the whole system of the community that you live in and how what you're doing contributes to the overall sustainability of the system. And that helps you to sort of let go of sunk costs where necessary and focus on the now and how you can be in a beautiful space and grow delicious food and also learn more about how to be a designer. The nice thing about being a renter, and especially if you move often, is that you get to witness how your ideas play out in a lot of different spaces. And often you get to circle back to those places years later and see if what you designed and installed really was resilient enough to withstand the tendency of people who weren't necessarily aligned with the same ethics with which the site was designed. So it can be really, really fascinating learning process, even if sometimes it's a little bit frustrating. Another thing to consider if you're a renter is to access the land of people who are not renting. So, befriend the neighbor who has a big farm down the road, if you can find one, or who has land that they're not using, and offer to buy some fruit trees if you can, to install permanently on their land, if you can use their land also to grow annual vegetables for yourself. So you could use private land for public benefit in this way, and you can bridge gaps a little bit here and there as a renter. Again, circling back though, don't underestimate the power of container gardening. You can do a lot in a very small space, and if you really take the time to look at what's around you, you can, even a tiny patio can grow quite a bit of food. And as you can see behind me, even I have just a few kind of ornamental plants in the vertical space. But often on a larger site, when somebody does own property or when they do have a lot of space to spread out and they don't make good use of the vertical space. So that's another learning journey that we can have as renters of how to make best use of what we do have available. And the other thing to just remember, and that I wanted to mention for permaculture renters, is that you can move your plants. You can put a bunch of fruit trees in the ground, live in that place for 5 years, and then pop them out of the ground and move them to the next place. And I find that's a lot more successful than just keeping them in pots all the time, because I don't know where I'm going to be necessarily. So, the trees are going to get bigger. Everything's going to be healthier in the ground. So go ahead and just put it in the ground if you think you're going to be there through the season. And then when everything goes dormant, schedule your moves to time somewhat with the natural growing cycles. You can get a lot more into gardening in that way. Now, as far as non-gardening activities that permaculture renters can do, the most common one that comes to mind is the bucket under the sink gray water. So, you don't re-pipe your whole system, but you just pull out the trap underneath whichever sinks and pop a bucket under there, and when it fills up, you use that to water your plants. Very simple water cycling system. It saves you money, and it helps you to learn little bits about gray water. You learn that if you let it sit for too long, it gets really gross. You learn how the plants respond to this much water or that much water. Gray water can be more alkaline. It starts to pull you into a consciousness regarding what's going down into the pipes, into the bucket. So little tiny things like that can really expand your abilities as a designer. And another thing that's really, really helpful to tap into, let's say you don't live a place, you're renting and you don't live somewhere where you can garden at all, like not even containers, but you still want to learn permaculture, you want to get involved in stuff, you don't want to do the gray water thing. So get out there and get involved in things like alternative economics and alternative transportation and plugging into social justice issues in your community, recycling, getting into like the free store, free gift economy, experiments in your neighborhood. There's a lot that can happen, and you could be generating social capital for yourself and bridging connections with a lot of different types of people in your community. And you can also be learning more and more about systems thinking and about how to be a designer, so that then when and if you gain access to land, you will be more equipped to design it in an equitable way that's not just equitable to the other species and to the earth that the land is on, but also to the community of humans that it impacts. So, the work, the people care is fully 1/3. It's really kind of 2/3 of the permaculture ethical triangle, because, care for the earth, that's part of it. Care for the people, that includes ourselves, that includes our neighbors, and then this third ethic, which is, limits to growth and consumption, or sharing the surplus, or paying it forward, considering the needs of others, and not centering yourself in the design. So that applies to us as renters in sort of more ways than if you own a place, right? Because as renters, we always have to consider, the landlady and the neighbors, and is this the best place for me, or what's, how am I going to work in this place, and so in a way, it's kind of a really cool way to be a permaculturist, because you get to see and influence so much change, and then that changes you as a designer, and each new place that you go to gets better and better. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about it, and let me know what you think, and let's chat.